Welcome, friends, to a gentle journey through the world of Death Note, where gods of death drop notebooks into the human world and destinies shift with the stroke of a pen. Tonight, we will wander together through a story of justice and morality, of genius and consequence, and the quiet moments when choices shape everything. These facts are not told with urgency, but with calm and care, meant to ease your mind and help you drift into a peaceful rest. Over the next while, we will move slowly through 140 facts about Death Note, each one a soft exploration of this dark but fascinating tale, told in a way that invites sleep and imagination. Let the words flow like pages turning in candlelight, like the steady rhythm of rain against windows, gentle and soothing. If you enjoy this restful journey, please consider subscribing and share with me where you are listening from tonight. Now, let us begin as we step into a world where notebooks hold the power of life and death. Fact 1. Death Note was created by writer Tsugumi Oba and artist Takeshi Obata, a collaboration that brought together psychological thriller writing with incredibly detailed artwork. The manga began serialization in Weekly Shonen Jump in December of 2003 and ran until May of 2006. Oba's identity remains largely mysterious, with the pen name potentially hiding one person or multiple writers. Obata had previously worked on Hikaru no Go, another successful series, and brought his skill for drawing expressive faces and atmospheric scenes to Death Note. The partnership between writer and artist was crucial, as the story relied on visual storytelling as much as dialogue, with panels showing minute changes in expression that revealed characters' inner thoughts. Their collaboration created a series that felt mature and sophisticated despite appearing in a magazine aimed at teenage boys. Fact 2. The concept of a Death Note came to Oba fully formed, complete with rules and limitations. The basic premise was simple yet compelling. If you write someone's name in this notebook while picturing their face, that person will die. The notebook belonged to Shinigami, gods of death who existed in their own realm and were meant to use the notebooks to extend their own lifespans by taking human lives. The specific rules about how the Death Note worked were crucial to the story's tension, creating a system with clear boundaries that both Light and his opponents had to work within. The notebook was not all-powerful but had specific limitations. You needed to know the victim's face and real name. You could specify the cause and time of death within certain parameters, and the user was bound to be visited by the Shinigami who dropped the notebook. Fact 3. Light Yagami was a 17-year-old high school student when he found the Death Note, and his character was deliberately written to be both sympathetic and horrifying. Light was not a troubled delinquent or an obvious villain, but rather an honor student, handsome and athletic, popular with his peers, and from a good family with a police detective father. He represented privilege and potential, someone society would expect great things from. This made his transformation into a mass murderer all the more disturbing, showing that evil could emerge not from deprivation or trauma but from idealism twisted by power. Light genuinely believed he was doing the right thing, cleansing the world of evil, and his conviction made him dangerous. His character challenged readers to question their own sense of justice and whether the ends could ever justify the means he employed. Fact 4. The name Light Yagami carried symbolic weight in Japanese. The character for Light's given name, Raito, was written with characters meaning moon and god, though it was pronounced like the English word light. His surname Yagami could be read as night god. This wordplay connected light to both illumination and darkness, suggesting the duality of his nature. He saw himself as a god bringing light to a dark world, but his methods were dark, and his judgments fell like night. The name also referenced the Judeo-Christian concept of Lucifer, the light-bearer who fell from grace through pride. Light's name thus foreshadowed his role as someone who would bring judgment while himself being judged, who would illuminate while casting shadows. Fact 5. Ryuk was the Shinigami who dropped his death note into the human world out of boredom. Unlike traditional depictions of death gods as solemn or frightening, Ryuk was designed to be bizarre and somewhat comedic, with his skeletal face, wild hair, and constant craving for apples. Ryuk was not evil but rather amoral and detached, viewing humans as entertainment. He followed Light not to help him but to watch what would happen, finding Light's actions interesting but never truly caring about the outcome. Ryuk represented the arbitrary nature of death itself, showing no preference for good or evil, appearing when least expected and taking lives without malice or compassion. His laughter echoed through the series, a reminder that death found humor in human struggles, while humans found only tragedy. Fact 6. L. Lolliot was the world's greatest detective, a genius who worked on cases that stumped international law enforcement. His true identity was kept secret, known only as L, and his appearance was designed to contrast sharply with Light's polished look. L had wild black hair, dark circles under his eyes from constant sleeplessness, and a habit of sitting in a peculiar crouched position with his knees drawn up. He ate massive amounts of sweets, claiming sugar helped him think, and held objects in unusual ways, pinching them with thumb and forefinger. These quirks made L seem odd and childlike, but beneath the strange exterior was a mind that rivaled and perhaps surpassed Light's. L approached cases with pure logic and was willing to manipulate and sacrifice others if it meant catching his target, showing that his methods, while legal, were not necessarily moral. Fact 7. The battle between Light and L became the core of Death Note's first half, a chess match played with human lives as pieces. Each tried to outthink the other, setting traps and counter-traps, making moves and reading their opponent's intentions. The series spent as much time inside the characters' heads as showing action, with internal monologues revealing the calculations behind every word and gesture. Panels would show a character's face remaining neutral while their thoughts raced through possibilities and countermeasures. This created incredible tension despite the lack of physical violence, making the audience feel the weight of every conversation. The intellectual battle was exhausting for both characters, requiring them to think steps ahead constantly and never relax, creating a relationship that was adversarial yet deeply connected. Fact 8. The Shinigami realm was depicted as a wasteland where gods of death spent eternity in boredom and apathy. The realm was barren rock and twisted structures floating in gray void, with Shinigami lounging about with nothing to do. They were meant to kill humans to extend their own lifespans, but most had grown too lazy to bother, resulting in Shinigami who were essentially immortal through inaction. Ryuk was unusual in his willingness to drop his notebook into the human world, driven not by duty or malice, but simple boredom. The Shinigami realm represented a kind of hell, created by eternal existence without purpose, where beings granted power over life and death found that power meaningless. It suggested that immortality itself might be a curse rather than a blessing. Fact 9. Light's father, Soichiro Yagami, was a police detective who led the Japanese task force investigating Kira. Soichiro represented traditional justice and morality, a man who believed deeply in law and order and doing what was right regardless of personal cost. His relationship with light created profound, dramatic irony, as Soichiro never suspected his own son was the killer he hunted. Soichiro's unwavering faith in light, his pride in his son's accomplishments, and his belief in light's good character made his story tragic. The series returned repeatedly to the father-son relationship, showing Soichiro's love and light's manipulation of that love. Soichiro's character asked whether a good man could raise a monster, and whether parents ever truly knew their children. Fact 10. The rules of the Death Note were gradually revealed throughout the series, each new rule creating opportunities and limitations for Light's plans. The notebook came with basic instructions, but more obscure rules emerged as needed. You could write the cause and details of death, but they had to be physically possible. If no cause was specified, the victim died of a heart attack. You could control someone's actions before death for a limited time. Touching the notebook allowed you to see the Shinigami attached to it. Anyone who used the notebook could neither go to heaven nor hell. These rules created a framework that made Light's schemes believable, preventing him from being too powerful while giving him enough flexibility to be creative. The rules also created puzzle-like scenarios where Light had to work within constraints. Fact 11. Misa Amane was introduced as the second Kira, a young woman who obtained a death note from the Shinigami Rem and used it to help Kira's mission. Misa was a popular model and actress who worshipped Kira because he had killed the burglar who murdered her parents. Unlike Light's calculated approach, Misa acted impulsively out of devotion and emotion, making her both useful and dangerous to Light's plans. Misa had made the Shinigami ideal twice, trading half her remaining lifespan each time for the ability to see people's names and lifespans by looking at their faces. This power made her extremely valuable, but also shortened her life dramatically. Misa represented blind faith and self-sacrifice, willing to die for Light and Kira's cause without questioning whether that cause was just. Fact 12. The Shinigami eyes were a power that allowed the user to see anyone's name and remaining lifespan floating above their head, but obtaining this power required trading half your remaining life. This deal was crucial to the plot, as it gave certain Death Note users a tremendous advantage in identifying victims but came at a terrible cost. Light refused to make the deal, unwilling to sacrifice his own life even though it would make his mission easier. This refusal showed Light's fundamental selfishness, his unwillingness to pay the price he demanded others pay. Misa made the deal without hesitation, twice, showing her willingness to sacrifice everything for Light. The ideal represented the series' theme that power always came with a price, and that the price of power often destroyed those who sought it. Fact 13. Rem was the Shinigami who gave Misa her death note, and unlike Ryuk, Rem genuinely cared about her human. Rem had inherited feelings for Misa from a previous Shinigami named Gellus, who had died saving Misa's life. Shinigami were forbidden from using the death note to extend human lives, and doing so would kill them. Gellus had loved Misa and used his death note to kill her stalker before he could murder her, dying as a result. Rem took Gellus's notebook and his feelings to Misa, creating a complex situation where a god of death acted to protect life rather than take it. Rem's devotion to Misa ultimately led to her own death, making her one of the most sympathetic characters in the series despite being literally a death god. Fact 14. L's three successors were raised in Wami's house, an orphanage in England that trained gifted children to potentially become the next L. The top three candidates were Nier, Mello, and Matt, each possessing genius-level intelligence but different personalities and approaches. Nier was calm and logical, similar to L, but even more emotionally detached, using toys and models to visualize his deductions. Mello was passionate and willing to break rules, joining the mafia to pursue his goals and eating chocolate constantly. Matt was a skilled hacker who supported Mello's plans, usually seen with goggles and a cigarette. The existence of successors showed that L had prepared for his own death, recognizing that his dangerous work might get him killed. It also suggested that genius could be cultivated but not controlled, as each successor developed their own distinct methods. Fact 15. The potato chip scene became one of the most memorable and memed moments in anime history, despite being simple in concept. Light, while under surveillance, needed to test killing criminals without being detected. He put a miniature television and Death Note inside a bag of potato chips, then made a show of studying while dramatically eating chips, writing names between bites. As he wrote a name, he ate a chip and proclaimed, "I'll take a potato chip and eat it." The scene's over-the-top drama turned a mundane action into an iconic moment, symbolizing Light's theatrical nature and the series' ability to find tension in everyday situations. The scene also showed Light's genius in hiding his actions in plain sight, and the absurd lengths he went to maintain his innocent appearance. Fact 16. The tennis match between Light and L was pure psychological warfare disguised as sport. Both were skilled players, but the match was really about reading each other, testing reactions, and trying to force mistakes. L suggested they play, and Light agreed, both knowing it was another battle in their war. They played intensely, crowds gathering to watch, neither willing to lose because losing might signal weakness. The match ended in a draw, both having proven their point. The scene showed how every interaction between them carried weight, how there was no casual moment free from their conflict. Even in play, they were deadly serious, their friendship and rivalry so intertwined that separation was impossible. Fact 17. Light's memory loss arc was a strategic gamble where he gave up ownership of the Death Note, erasing his memories of being Kira to prove his innocence. Light had planned this carefully, arranging for the notebook to be found and used by others, predicting how events would unfold in his absence. Without memories of the Death Note, Light genuinely believed he was innocent and worked sincerely with L to catch Kira. This created a unique situation where the audience saw the real Light, the person he might have been without the notebook. He was still brilliant and driven, but lacked the cold ruthlessness Kira possessed. When Light's memories returned, it was like watching someone die, as the decent person he had become was consumed by Kira once more. Fact 18. L's death came at the midpoint of the series, shocking readers who expected him to remain until the end. Light manipulated Rem into killing L by creating a situation where L's death was the only way to save Misa. Rem wrote L's name in her Death Note, along with Watari's, and died as a result, since she had acted to extend a human's life. L died sitting in his chair, his expression showing he had realized too late what was happening. His death was quiet and sudden, without drama or final words, emphasizing death's arbitrary nature. Light had won, but the victory felt hollow, as he had lost the only person who truly understood him. L's death changed the series' tone, removing the central conflict and leaving readers uncertain what would come next. Fact 19. The time skip after L's death jumped forward several years, showing Light having achieved his dream of a world without crime. He had become the new L, using that identity to control law enforcement globally while continuing as Kira. Crime rates had dropped dramatically, wars had ended, and many people genuinely believed Kira had created paradise. But this utopia was built on fear, with people too terrified to break laws or even think rebellious thoughts. The time skip showed the logical endpoint of Light's vision, a world where order was maintained through terror. It asked whether such a world was worth living in, whether eliminating crime was worth eliminating freedom. The answer presented was ambiguous, showing both the appeal and the horror of Light's new world. Fact 20. Nier approached the case against Kira with cold logic, lacking L's emotional investment and personal rivalry with Light. Nier saw catching Kira as a puzzle to solve, not a personal crusade, which made him effective but less engaging as a character. He used toy figures to represent people, manipulating them on boards as he thought through scenarios. Nier's detachment meant he could consider possibilities L might have dismissed due to friendship or intuition. He suspected Light from the beginning and worked methodically to prove it, never giving Light the intellectual stimulation L had provided. This lack of emotional connection was strategic, but also showed Nier's limitation. He was brilliant but didn't understand human nature the way L had, relying instead on pure logic and probability. Fact 21. Mello took a more aggressive approach, joining the mafia and kidnapping people to force information from them. He was willing to become a criminal himself, to catch Kira, blurring the lines between justice and revenge. Mello's methods horrified Nier but proved effective in disrupting Light's carefully constructed systems. Mello suffered severe burns and lost several comrades during his pursuit, paying a physical and emotional price Nier never faced. The contrast between Nier's patience and Mello's aggression showed two valid approaches to pursuing justice, neither completely right or wrong. Mello's willingness to sacrifice, including ultimately his own life, made him more sympathetic, despite his criminal actions, showing that good intentions could drive terrible deeds. Fact 22. Takada Kiyomi served as Kira's public spokesperson, a newscaster who delivered Kira's messages to the world. Light had dated her in college, and their reunion allowed him to manipulate her into service. Takada genuinely believed in Kira and saw herself as part of something greater, never realizing she was just another tool. She was given a piece of the death note to use under Light's direction, making her complicit in murders while thinking herself a Messiah's chosen servant. Takada's story showed how charismatic leaders could inspire devotion, how people could commit atrocities while believing themselves righteous. Her eventual death, burned alive in a truck by Light to eliminate evidence, revealed how Light saw even his most devoted followers as disposable. Fact 23. The SPK, or Special Provision for Kira, was an American organization formed to capture Kira, led by Nier and supported by the U.S. government. The SPK operated independently of the Japanese task force, creating parallel investigations that sometimes clashed. The organization showed that the Kira case had become international, threatening enough that nations deployed significant resources against him. The SPK's existence also created opportunities for Light, as he could manipulate conflicts between organizations. The bureaucracy and politics surrounding the investigations added realism, showing that even when hunting a mass murderer, human organizations dealt with funding, jurisdiction, and interagency rivalry. The SPK represented institutional power attempting to stop individual power, a theme running throughout the series. Fact 24. The Yellow Box warehouse served as the setting for the final confrontation between Nier's team and Light. The warehouse was sterile and empty, filled only with Nier's prepared evidence, and the people gathered to witness the truth. The location was chosen for its isolation and controllability, allowing Nier to stage his revelation perfectly. The warehouse setting was deliberately anticlimactic, a mundane space for an epic conclusion, emphasizing that Light's grand vision ended in an empty building with his lies exposed. The choice reflected the series' approach to action, finding drama in conversations and revelations rather than physical confrontation. The warehouse was a stage where Light's performance finally failed. Fact 25. Light's final moments showed his complete breakdown, his carefully maintained mask shattering to reveal desperation and madness underneath. After Nier exposed him as Kira, Light tried various arguments and manipulations, but nothing worked. Mikami, his follower, had made an error that exposed them. Light's father lay dying, having sacrificed himself while still believing his son innocent. Surrounded, and with no escape, Light begged Ryuk to write the investigators' names in the death note. But Ryuk, true to his nature, wrote Light's name instead, explaining that he had always known Light would eventually die, that their game had to end sometime. Light fled the warehouse, wounded and desperate, running through the streets as his heart attack began, dying on a staircase while imagining his younger self, innocent and full of potential, walking away. Fact 26. The ending was controversial, with some readers feeling Light's death was too quick, while others found it appropriately pathetic. Light Yagami, who had imagined himself a god, died alone and terrified, his grand vision collapsing to nothing. There was no nobility in his end, no final clever trick, just a young man who had wasted his potential on a twisted dream. The ending asked whether Light ever understood that he had become the evil he claimed to fight, whether in his final moments he saw the truth about himself. Ryuk's final comment, "It was good," referred to the entertainment Light had provided, reminding readers that to death itself, even this tragedy was just a passing amusement. Fact 27. The Shinigami were governed by their own rules and hierarchy, though their society was decayed and dysfunctional. A Shinigami king existed but rarely intervened, and most Shinigami had stopped caring about their duties. The only real rule they followed was that they needed to kill humans periodically to extend their own lifespans, but even this was done lazily. Shinigami, who broke rules, could be punished, but enforcement was inconsistent. The Shinigami realm represented bureaucratic decay, an institution that continued existing long after its purpose was forgotten. This mirrored human organizations in the series, where rules existed but were selectively enforced, where power structures continued by inertia rather than effectiveness. Fact 28. The Death Note had inspired real-world controversy and even bans in some countries, with authorities concerned that it glamorized violence and provided a blueprint for murders. Several incidents occurred where people created replica Death Notes and wrote names in them, though of course no one actually died. The series sparked debates about media influence on behavior, whether fiction could inspire real harm. Schools banned the notebooks students created, and discussions arose about whether certain ideas were too dangerous to present, even in fictional contexts. The controversy showed both societies' discomfort with moral ambiguity in entertainment and a fundamental misunderstanding of the series' message, which clearly portrayed Light as a villain whose ideology led to his destruction. Fact 29. The art style of Death Note was notably detailed and realistic for a Shonen Jump manga, with Obata drawing backgrounds and objects with photographic accuracy. Character designs were varied and distinctive, each person instantly recognizable even in silhouette. Obata paid particular attention to hands, as hand positions conveyed emotion and intention, crucial in a series built on subtle psychological warfare. The shadows and shading created a dark, oppressive atmosphere that matched the themes. Obata's style was perfect for a series where reading facial expressions was essential, where a slight change in someone's eyes could indicate they had realized something crucial. The detailed backgrounds grounded the fantastic premise in reality, making the supernatural Death Note feel like it could exist in our world. Fact 30. The anime adaptation by Madhouse Studios was remarkably faithful to the manga, capturing its tone and style while making changes necessary for the medium. The anime added color, voice acting, and animation that brought the internal battles to life, using visual effects and music to heighten tension. The soundtrack by Yoshihisa Hirano and Hideki Taniguchi became iconic, with dramatic orchestral pieces emphasizing the series' operatic feel. The opening theme, The World, by Nightmare, and second opening, What's Up People, conveyed the series' energy and darkness. The anime made Death Note accessible to wider audiences and introduced many fans to the story, though it ended before the manga's conclusion, condensing the second half significantly. Fact 31. Light's relationships with women were consistently manipulative, viewing them as tools rather than people. He dated Takada to use her, pretended affection for Misa to control her, and showed no genuine emotional connection to anyone. Light's inability to love revealed his fundamental isolation, his belief that he was above such human weaknesses. This made him tragic despite his villainy, as his quest for godhood left him without the human connections that give life meaning. The women in Light's life often loved him genuinely, making his exploitation of them more disturbing. The series showed how charisma could mask cruelty, how charm could be weaponized, and how people could mistake manipulation for affection. Fact 32. The concept of justice was central to Death Note, with different characters holding wildly different definitions. Light believed justice meant punishing criminals and creating a world ruled by fear of judgment. L believed justice meant following evidence and catching killers regardless of motive. Nier saw justice as solving puzzles correctly. The series never definitively stated which view was right, instead showing how each led to both good and bad outcomes. This moral ambiguity made Death Note intellectually engaging, refusing to provide easy answers. The series asked readers to examine their own beliefs about justice, punishment, and whether anyone had the right to judge others. The question remained unanswered because perhaps no answer existed. Fact 33. The live-action films adapted the story with significant changes, creating an original ending where L survived. The film starred Tatsuya Fujiwara as Light and Kenichi Matsuyama as L, both delivering memorable performances. The movies condensed the story significantly, removing many characters and simplifying plot lines. The changed ending was controversial, as some felt it betrayed the original, while others appreciated seeing L win. The films showed how different mediums required different approaches, how the same story could be told multiple ways. They also demonstrated Death Note's flexibility, its core concept strong enough to support variations while maintaining its essential tension and themes. Fact 34. L's sweet tooth was not just a quirk, but represented his approach to life, taking pleasure in simple things despite the darkness of his work. He ate cakes, candy, and desserts constantly, often stacking sugar cubes in his tea to absurd heights. This childlike behavior contrasted with his adult responsibility for solving humanity's worst crimes. The sweets represented innocence maintained despite corruption surrounding him, or perhaps indulgence granted to himself knowing his life would likely be short. L's sugar consumption became iconic, with fans associating him with strawberry cakes and elaborate desserts. It humanized him, making him more than just a genius detective, showing that beneath the brilliant mind was someone who still found joy in small pleasures. Fact 35. The rule that Death Note users couldn't go to heaven or hell was revealed late in the series, suggesting a kind of oblivion awaited them. This rule raised philosophical questions about the nature of sin and punishment, whether using the Death Note was somehow beyond normal morality. Some interpreted the rule as meaning no afterlife existed for anyone, that heaven and hell were myths, making the rule meaningless. Others saw it as divine judgment, marking Death Note users as beyond redemption. The ambiguity was intentional, allowing readers to draw their own conclusions. The rule emphasized that using the Death Note had consequences beyond legal punishment, that some actions marked you spiritually, whatever that meant. Fact 36. Matsuda was portrayed as the least intelligent member of the investigation team, often making mistakes and being dismissed by others. Yet Matsuda was also the most emotionally honest character, expressing doubt and fear when others hid their feelings. He genuinely grieved for L and struggled with moral questions about Kira's actions. In the end, Matsuda shot Light multiple times in anger and pain, the only character to physically attack him. This moment revealed that Matsuda's supposed weakness, his emotionality, gave him a kind of strength others lacked. He could act on feeling when logic paralyzed smarter characters. Matsuda represented the value of emotional intelligence, showing that being smart didn't mean being right, and that sometimes simple moral intuition saw truth that complex reasoning missed. Fact 37. Mikami Teru became Light's most devoted follower, a prosecutor who independently believed in Kira's vision before being recruited. Mikami had suffered bullying as a child and developed a black and white view of humanity, dividing people into those who deserved to live and those who should be deleted. His extreme views made him perfect for Light's purposes, but also ultimately led to Light's downfall. Mikami's obsessive dedication, his ritualistic killing of criminals while chanting, "Delete, delete, delete," showed the logical extreme of Light's ideology. Mikami was what Light might have become if he'd been less charismatic and more openly zealous. His existence proved that Light's vision attracted dangerous extremists, that Kira's world would be ruled by fanatics rather than justice. Fact 38. The Shinigami's apples had no special properties except that Ryuk loved them and found human world apples delicious compared to Shinigami realm fruit. Ryuk's addiction to apples created comedic moments but also showed that even death gods had their weaknesses and pleasures. Light used apples to manipulate Ryuk's cooperation, bribing him with fruit to get information or assistance. The image of a death god eating apples while watching humans kill each other became iconic, symbolizing the series' mix of darkness and absurdity. Apples also carried biblical symbolism, evoking the fruit from the tree of knowledge that brought about humanity's fall. Ryuk offering the Death Note was like the serpent offering the apple, granting knowledge that corrupted rather than enlightened. Fact 39. Watari was L's handler and caretaker, an elderly man who had founded Wami's house and supported L throughout his career. Watari's real name and background were never revealed, and he died moments before L, his name written in Rem's Death Note. Watari represented support and loyalty without question, someone who enabled L's methods even when they were questionable. He helped create the successor system, ensuring L's work would continue after his death. Watari's death was often overshadowed by L's, but was equally significant, ending the partnership that had made L possible. Without Watari, L would never have become the world's greatest detective, showing that even genius required support systems and that no one succeeded alone. Fact 40. The task force members who continued working after L's death showed remarkable courage, knowing they were targets for Kira. These police officers and investigators chose duty over safety, pursuing justice despite the risk. Aizawa, Mogi, and Ide each had moments of doubt but continued, driven by loyalty to their fallen comrades and belief in their mission. Their persistence showed that ordinary people could resist tyranny even when genius failed. that courage didn't require brilliance. The task force represented traditional law enforcement, fallible and sometimes outmatched, but fundamentally decent. Their survival to the end, while smarter characters died, suggested that moral integrity mattered more than intelligence. Fact 41. The musical adaptations of Death Note, both in Japan and internationally, found ways to dramatize internal monologues through song. The Japanese musical starred Kenji Urai and Hayato Kakizawa alternating as Light, with elaborate staging and rock opera styling. The musical format suited the series' theatrical nature, its characters who performed their lives as much as lived them. Songs expressed the characters' hidden thoughts, turning interior conflict into external performance. The musicals showed Death Note's adaptability and enduring popularity, its story compelling enough to work across radically different mediums. They also emphasized the series' operatic qualities, its larger-than-life characters, and dramatic confrontations that already bordered on musical theater. Fact 42. The Netflix adaptation attempted a Western version of the story set in Seattle with American characters, but it received mixed reviews for changing too much while understanding too little. The film made Light more sympathetic initially and changed Elle's character significantly, creating a version that felt disconnected from the original's themes. The Netflix version struggled with condensing a complex story into a 2-hour film, losing nuance and psychological depth. However, it introduced Death Note to new audiences unfamiliar with anime or manga, serving as a gateway despite its flaws. The adaptation showed how difficult it was to translate culturally specific concepts like honor, justice, and societal pressure into different contexts while maintaining the story's meaning. Fact 43. Light's sister Sayu was kidnapped by Mello's organization in an attempt to force the Japanese government to hand over the Death Note. The kidnapping devastated the Yagami family, with Soichiro willing to sacrifice his life to save her. Sayu was eventually rescued but traumatized, her innocence destroyed by being used as a pawn in conflicts she didn't understand. Her kidnapping represented the collateral damage of Light's actions, innocent family members hurt by his choices. Sayu had believed in her brother completely, never suspecting his dark side, and her continued ignorance protected her while also making her vulnerable. The subplot showed that Light's war affected real people beyond his intended targets. Fact 44. The Yotsuba Group arc introduced Death Note use for corporate warfare, showing how the notebook could be weaponized for profit rather than ideology. 8 executives used the Death Note to kill business rivals, eliminate obstacles, and increase their company's value. This arc demonstrated that if the Death Note became public knowledge, it would likely be used for petty, selfish reasons rather than grand visions. The businessmen were pathetic compared to Light, lacking his intelligence or conviction, using godlike power for stock prices and promotions. This demonstrated how extraordinary power in ordinary hands led to banal evil rather than grand villainy. The arc also allowed Light to appear to help catch Kira while actually orchestrating everything behind the scenes. Fact 45. Misa's lifespan kept decreasing throughout the series due to multiple Shinigami eye deals and the general strain of being devoted to Light. By the end, she had lived far past what her remaining time should have allowed, suggesting that her will to support Light somehow extended her life beyond its natural limit. After Light's death, Misa was shown standing alone on a building's edge, on the anniversary of his death, heavily implied to have committed suicide. Her ending was tragic but unsurprising, as she had never developed an identity beyond her devotion to Light and Kira. Misa's death represented the cost of losing yourself in another person, of making someone else your entire reason for existence. When Light died, She had nothing left, having sacrificed not just her lifespan but herself. Fact 46. The rules written in the Death Note were both instructions and limitations, some added by Shinigami and some inherent to the notebook's magic. The rules could be used strategically, with fake rules added to mislead investigators. Light used this tactic, writing false rules that seemingly exonerated him. The existence of fake rules created uncertainty about which rules were real, adding another layer to the mind games. The proliferation of rules also showed how systems of power became complex and contradictory, how loopholes emerged, and how regulations could be manipulated. The Death Note's rules became a microcosm for legal systems, both necessary for order and vulnerable to exploitation by those clever enough to twist them. Fact 47. The series explored surveillance and privacy extensively, showing how Light lived under constant observation while maintaining his innocence. Cameras monitored his room, his actions were tracked, and investigators analyzed every detail of his life. Light had to assume he was always watched, planning elaborate schemes to kill while being observed. This created a police state atmosphere where preventing crime justified invading privacy. The surveillance themes were prescient, predicting debates about security versus freedom that became more relevant as technology advanced. The series asked how much privacy we should sacrifice for safety, and whether perfect surveillance would prevent crime or just create new forms of tyranny. Fact 48. Naomi Misora was a former FBI agent and L's former colleague who nearly exposed Light early in the series. She was intelligent enough to deduce crucial information about Kira, but Light manipulated her into revealing her name and killed her before she could report her findings. Naomi's death was significant because she represented someone who could have matched Light intellectually, a path not taken where Light might have been caught immediately. Her death also showed Light's ruthlessness, his willingness to kill an innocent investigator who threatened him. Naomi became a tragic what-if, a character whose survival might have changed everything, whose intelligence was wasted because Light was slightly more clever and much less ethical. Fact 49. The concept of writing someone's name to kill them drew on various cultural traditions where knowing someone's true name granted power over them. In many folkloric traditions, names held magical significance, and revealing your real name to the wrong entity could allow control over you. The Death Note weaponized this ancient fear, making names literal keys to life and death. The requirement to know both face and name created balance, preventing the notebook from being too powerful while maintaining tension. It also meant that anonymity became a weapon against Kira, with L protecting himself by never revealing his true identity. The name-based system reflected how identity itself became a vulnerability in the information age. Fact 50. The psychological toll of using the Death Note was explored through various users who showed different responses to becoming killers. Light showed no remorse, viewing his murders as necessary sacrifices. Misa killed cheerfully, seeing it as serving love and justice. Mikami killed ritualistically, turning murder into religious duty. Higuchi of the Yotsuba group killed nervously, aware he was doing wrong but unable to stop. These varied responses showed that the Death Note didn't corrupt equally, but rather amplified existing tendencies. Those with sociopathic traits embraced it, while those with conscience struggled. The notebook revealed character rather than creating it, showing who people truly were when given absolute power. Fact 51. The Shinigami couldn't be killed by conventional means, as they were already dead, existing as supernatural entities. However, they could die by breaking certain rules, like using the Death Note to extend a human's life, or by running out of lifespan themselves if they stopped killing. This immortality made them apathetic, having lived so long that human concerns seemed trivial. The Shinigami's existence raised questions about whether eternal life was desirable, whether consciousness without growth or change was truly living. Their boredom and decay suggested that mortality gave life meaning, that endings made moments precious. The Shinigami envied humans not despite but because of their mortality. Fact 52. The fan community around Death Note created extensive theories, fan fiction, and artwork exploring alternative scenarios and character relationships. Fans debated endlessly about moral questions, discussed which character was smarter, and created what-if scenarios where different people obtained the Death Note. The series inspired philosophical discussions about justice, with fans taking positions ranging from full support of Light's vision to complete condemnation. This engagement showed how the series successfully made audiences think critically about ethics rather than simply consuming entertainment. The community kept the series alive years after its conclusion, introducing new generations to its questions and conflicts. Fact 53. Light's transformation throughout the series was subtle and gradual, making it hard to pinpoint exactly when he crossed from idealist to villain. Initially, he hesitated before killing, felt guilt, and genuinely believed he was doing good. As time passed, killing became easier, his justifications grew weaker, and his ego expanded. By the end, Light killed innocent people without hesitation if they threatened his plans, showing complete moral decay. This gradual descent was more disturbing than sudden corruption would have been, showing how small compromises could lead to monstrous actions. Light's journey suggested that anyone could become evil if they consistently chose expediency over principle. Fact 54. The series examined power structures and authority, showing how institutions like police, governments, and media could be manipulated by one intelligent individual. Light weaponized these systems against themselves, using law enforcement to hide his crimes and media to spread his message. The ease with which he manipulated these structures raised unsettling questions about their vulnerability to determined bad actors. The series suggested that no system was foolproof, that all institutions relied ultimately on human judgment, and that human judgment could be fallible, corruptible, or simply outmatched by superior intelligence. Fact 55. The relationship between Light and his mother was barely explored, but revealing in its absence. His mother represented normal family life, someone who loved Light unconditionally and saw only her brilliant son, never suspecting his crimes. Light's ability to maintain this facade, to sit at family dinners and act like a normal son while planning murders, showed his complete compartmentalization. His mother's ignorance was both a protection and a tragedy, as she never knew her son but also never lost him the way his father did. The unexplored mother-son relationship suggested depths of deception in Light's character. Fact 56. The one-shot special chapters published after the series ended explored what happened in the years following Light's death. These chapters showed that Kira worshippers still existed, that some people treated Light as a martyred god, and that the debate about his legacy continued. The post-series world wasn't simply peaceful but remained complicated, with different factions arguing about whether Kira had been right. This showed that Light's influence outlasted his life, that ideas once released couldn't be easily contained. The specials suggested that history's judgment remained divided, that no clear consensus existed about whether Kira had been hero or villain. Fact 57. Nier's use of finger puppets and toys to think through problems created memorable visual imagery, but also represented his detachment from human elements of cases. He saw people as pieces to move, analyzing their probable actions without emotional investment. This made him effective, but also limited, as he sometimes missed emotional motivations that drove people's actions. Nier's toys showed how he processed the world, reducing complex humans to simple models. This reductionism was both his strength and weakness, allowing clear analysis while missing nuances that came from understanding people as more than logical actors. Fact 58. The series' art included extensive use of dramatic shadows, sharp angles, and exaggerated expressions during key moments, creating visual intensity that matched the psychological tension. Characters' faces would distort slightly during moments of realization or deception, giving readers visual cues about internal states. The art style made reading expressions crucial, as subtle changes indicated lying, fear, or sudden understanding. This visual language was essential for a series where so much happened internally, turning thought into action through artistic choices. The distinctive art made Death Note immediately recognizable and contributed significantly to its atmospheric impact. Fact 59. Light's academic excellence and athletic success made his choice to become a killer more inexplicable to others but perfectly logical to himself. He had achieved everything society told him to pursue: good grades, prestigious university acceptance, respect from peers and teachers, promising future prospects. Yet he found this insufficient, boring, a world that didn't match his sense of his own importance. The Death Note offered him unique significance, a chance to become literally divine. His murders were attempts to fill an existential void that success couldn't address, showing that achievement and purpose were different things. Fact 60. The series' publication in Shonen Jump was unusual, as the magazine typically featured action-oriented stories with clear heroes. Death Note's psychological focus, morally ambiguous protagonist, and emphasis on dialogue over fighting made it an outlier. Yet it became one of Jump's most successful series, proving that audiences wanted intellectual engagement alongside action. The series expanded what was possible in shonen manga, influencing later series to incorporate more complex moral questions and smarter protagonists. Death Note's success showed that teenage boys, the primary Jump demographic, could appreciate sophisticated storytelling when given the chance. Fact 61. Ryuk's decision to write Light's name in the Death Note at the end was predetermined from the moment he dropped the notebook. Ryuk had stated early on that he would be the one to write Light's name eventually, as all humans who used the Death Note met bad ends. This established inevitability created dramatic irony throughout the series, with readers knowing Light was doomed even as he appeared to succeed. Ryuk's final act wasn't betrayal but simply following through on his nature as a Shinigami. He had enjoyed watching Light's rise and felt nothing watching his fall, treating both as equally entertaining. Ryuk embodied death's neutrality, caring nothing for human concepts of loyalty or justice. Fact 62. The series explored media manipulation and public opinion, showing how Kira shaped narratives to gain public support. Light used Sakura TV and later major networks to broadcast his messages, creating a persona that appealed to people's frustrations with crime and desire for security. The series showed how easily public opinion could be swayed by fear, how people would sacrifice freedom for safety, and how media could amplify dangerous ideologies. These themes became increasingly relevant as social media and internet culture developed after the series ended, making Death Note's examination of information control almost prescient. Fact 63. L's crouching posture was reportedly based on how Obata himself sat while drawing, creating an autobiographical element in the character's design. The unusual position made L visually distinctive, while also suggesting his unwillingness to conform to social norms. L didn't sit properly because convention didn't interest him, only effectiveness. His posture was both practical, claiming it improved his deductive abilities, and symbolic, showing someone who refused to fit societal expectations. The crouch became one of anime's most imitated character quirks, instantly identifying L, even in silhouette. Fact 64. The live-action TV drama in Japan took yet another approach to adapting the material, creating original cases and storylines while maintaining core character relationships. The drama format allowed for episodic storytelling, showing L and Light's conflict across multiple cases rather than one continuous arc. This version made L more eccentric and comedic while keeping Light dark, creating tonal contrast that worked for television. The drama showed Death Note's flexibility as intellectual property, its core concept supporting numerous interpretations while maintaining recognizable identity. Each adaptation emphasized different aspects while preserving essential themes. Fact 65. The philosophical questions Death Note raised about utilitarianism, whether the ends justify the means, remained intentionally unanswered. Light represented extreme utilitarian thinking, killing thousands to save millions, breaking moral rules to achieve moral outcomes. The series showed both the appeal of this logic and its horrifying conclusions. L represented rule-based morality, believing some actions were wrong regardless of outcomes. The conflict between these philosophies drove the series, and neither character's position was entirely validated or rejected. This moral ambiguity made Death Note intellectually challenging, refusing to provide comfortable answers to difficult questions. Fact 66. Death Note's influence on later anime and manga was significant, inspiring numerous works featuring intelligent protagonists, psychological warfare, and morally complex scenarios. Series like Code Geass, Classroom of the Elite, and The Promised Neverland owed debts to Death Note's approach of making thinking exciting and showcasing brilliant characters outmaneuvering each other. Death Note proved that audiences would engage with complicated plots requiring attention and thought. Its legacy included not just direct imitators but a general elevation of expectations for intelligent storytelling in anime and manga. Fact 67. The series' treatment of women was criticized by some for making most female characters either devoted to male characters or less intelligent than male counterparts. Misa, Takada, and Sayu all defined themselves through relationships with men, while Naomi Misora was killed before her potential could be realized. However, defenders noted that the series portrayed everyone as pawns in Light's game, not just women, and that the criticism reflected broader issues in shonen manga rather than Death Note specifically. The gender dynamics sparked discussions about representation in manga and whether intellectual series had particular obligations to portrayal equity. Fact 68. Light's genuine friendship with L during the memory loss arc raised questions about what he might have become without the Death Note. Without Kira's memories, Light was still brilliant and ambitious, but also playful, capable of genuine camaraderie, and committed to justice rather than power. He and L worked together effectively, almost enjoying their partnership. This glimpse of alternate Light made his return to Kira more tragic, showing what had been lost when he picked up the Death Note. It suggested that Light wasn't inherently evil but had chosen to become so, making his fate feel more like waste than inevitable doom. Fact 69. The Shinigami's inability to be photographed or recorded except under specific circumstances created plot complications and solutions. Ryu couldn't appear in security footage, and normal people couldn't see him, making Light appear to talk to himself when conversing with Ryuk in public. This forced Light to be careful about when and how he communicated with Ryuk, creating additional challenges. The invisibility also meant Ryuk could observe without being observed, gathering information for Light. The supernatural elements thus served practical plot functions while maintaining consistent internal logic about how spiritual beings interacted with physical world. Fact 70. The Death Note's physical appearance. Black notebook with Death Note written in English on the cover became iconic and widely reproduced in merchandise and fan creations. The simple, ominous design perfectly captured the notebook's nature, ordinary enough to go unnoticed, distinctive enough to recognize, and clearly labeled for what it was. The choice to label it in English rather than Japanese suggested its universality, that death transcended language and culture. The physical object became a symbol representing the series, instantly recognizable even to people unfamiliar with the story. Fact 71. Matt's limited screen time made him surprisingly popular with fans, who latched onto his design and cool demeanor despite his minimal plot importance. He appeared primarily in the latter portion of the series, helping Mello's plans and ultimately dying during a shootout with the SPK. His popularity demonstrated how character design and aesthetic could create fan attachment even without extensive character development. Matt represented potential unrealized, a character who could have been significant but remained peripheral. His death barely mourned within the story, while fans created extensive fan works imagining his fuller life. Fact 72. The series ended on Valentine's Day in Japan, February 14, 2006, creating poetic symbolism for a story about twisted love, Light's love of power, Misa's love of light, L's love of puzzles. The Valentine's Day ending underscored how the series dealt with unhealthy attachments and destructive passions rather than romantic love. No relationships in Death Note were healthy or equal. All involved manipulation, obsession, or utilitarian calculation. The end date suggested that the series had been, in its dark way, about the consequences of loving wrong things or loving in wrong ways. Fact 73. The question of whether ordinary people would use a Death Note if they found one was debated extensively by fans. Many people claimed they wouldn't, but the series suggested otherwise through showing how even initially good people like Light could be corrupted. The Death Note didn't force anyone to kill, but it made killing so easy, so consequence-free, initially, that the temptation was nearly irresistible. The series implied that most people, if given such power and assured they wouldn't be caught, would eventually use it for something, even if they told themselves they wouldn't. This cynical view of human nature was part of what made the series disturbing. Fact 74. The symbolic use of red and black throughout the series created visual associations with death, danger, and judgment. The Death Note itself was black. Ryuk's coloring included black and red, and dramatic moments often featured red, highlighting, or backgrounds. The color palette created atmosphere while also providing visual contrast against the realistic backgrounds and character designs. The colors suggested blood and darkness without being explicitly gory, maintaining tension through implication rather than graphic violence. The art's subtlety made the series more disturbing than explicit violence would have been. Fact 75. Light's planning ability and foresight were portrayed as superhuman, requiring audiences to accept that he could predict events and manipulate people with impossible accuracy. This strained believability at times, but was necessary for the plot to function. The series asked audiences to accept that Light was simply that smart, that his plans really were that intricate and successful. This requirement for suspension of disbelief was both the series' strength, allowing for satisfying complexity, and potential weakness, as some readers found the coincidences and perfectly executed plans unrealistic. The balance between believability and entertainment was consistently tested. Fact 76. The series' pacing was generally excellent, moving quickly through developments while allowing tension to build. However, some readers felt the second half dragged compared to the L arc, with Near and Mellow less engaging as antagonists. The debate about pacing quality showed how subjective storytelling assessment could be, as others found the second half equally compelling. The pacing discussion also revealed how much L's presence had defined the series' energy, his removal creating a hole that couldn't be filled despite the story's continued intelligence and complexity. Fact 77. Soichiro Yagami's death scene was one of the series' most emotional moments, as he died still believing in his son's innocence. Light had manipulated his father into making a Shinigami Eye deal, shortening his life, then watched coldly as his father died. Soichiro saw Light's name and lifespan through the Shinigami eyes, but took this as proof Light wasn't Kira, not realizing that Death Note owners appeared differently to Shinigami eyes than to normal humans. He died happy, believing his son was innocent, never knowing the truth. His death represented the ultimate tragedy of Light's deception, that even in death, those who loved him remained deceived. Fact 78. The real-world impact of Death Note included philosophical courses, using it to teach ethics, discussion in legal circles about justice and punishment, and debates about whether such media should exist. The series transcended entertainment to become educational tool and cultural touchstone, referenced in discussions about morality, power, and justice. This impact showed how fiction could influence real-world discourse, how stories could make abstract concepts concrete and accessible. Death Note's use in educational contexts validated its intellectual content, while also showing how widely its influence spread beyond typical anime and manga audiences. Fact 79. Light's relationship with his father created one of the series' central tragedies, as Soichiro represented traditional values and honor that Light perverted. Soichiro was incorruptible, willing to die for justice, genuinely good. Light saw these qualities as weaknesses to exploit, manipulating his father's love and trust ruthlessly. The father-son dynamic asked whether good people could produce evil children, whether environment determined character, and whether familial bonds meant anything in the face of ideological differences. Soichiro's unconditional love couldn't save Light because Light didn't want saving, choosing power over his father's values. Fact 80. The use of classical music in key scenes, particularly in the anime's soundtrack, created associations between high art and intellectual warfare. The music suggested that Light and L's conflict was elevated, artistic even, more like a symphony than a simple chase. This framing was both appropriate, their battle was genuinely sophisticated and unsettling, as it aestheticized murder and manipulation. The beautiful music accompanying terrible actions created cognitive dissonance, forcing audiences to confront how easily they could find beauty in darkness. The soundtrack thus contributed to the series' moral complexity. Fact 81. Death Note's exploration of surveillance predicted and influenced discussions about privacy in the digital age. Written before smartphones and social media became ubiquitous, the series showed how constant monitoring could prevent crime while destroying privacy. The Kira investigation's use of wiretapping, hidden cameras, and tracking anticipated later debates about government surveillance programs. The series suggested that perfect security required perfect surveillance, but perfect surveillance meant no freedom. This prediction proved increasingly relevant as technology advanced, making Death Note's themes more prescient with each passing year. Fact 82. L's detective methods often violated rights and laws, using illegal surveillance, coercion, and manipulation that would invalidate evidence in real courts. This showed that L, while opposing Kira, wasn't simply good versus evil, but rather different approaches to achieving justice. L believed outcomes justified methods, much like Light did, though L at least operated within loosely defined legal frameworks. The moral ambiguity of L's methods complicated reader sympathy, forcing audiences to question whether they supported him because he opposed murder or because they liked him despite his questionable tactics. The series suggested that all power, even used for good ends, required compromising principles. Fact 83. The series' humor, while dark, provided necessary relief from constant tension. Ryuk's apple addiction, Misa's airheaded behavior, Matsuda's bumbling, and L's weird habits all created comedic moments that prevented the series from becoming oppressively grim. The humor also humanized characters who might otherwise seem too calculated or serious. Light occasionally showed wit. L's social awkwardness was played for laughs, and even tense confrontations sometimes featured absurd elements. This tonal balance kept the series engaging across its length, preventing audience fatigue that pure psychological thriller might have induced. Fact 84. The concept that criminals feared Kira and crime rates dropped under his reign raised uncomfortable questions about whether authoritarian systems could be justified by results. The series showed how populations could support tyrants who provided security, how fear could substitute for justice, and how quickly people would sacrifice freedom for safety. This wasn't presented as clearly wrong, but as genuinely complex, acknowledging that Kira's world had benefits even while showing its profound moral failures. The nuanced presentation forced readers to confront their own values, asking whether they too might support Kira if they lived in his world. Fact 85. Light's narcissism grew throughout the series, from confident intelligence to genuine God complex, where he believed he was divine. This character evolution showed how power corrupted gradually, how success reinforced belief in one's own infallibility. Light's increasing arrogance ultimately contributed to his downfall, as he underestimated Nier and Mello due to comparing them unfavorably with L. His hubris was both personality flaw and inevitable result of being treated as a god by millions. The series suggested that anyone worshipped long enough would start believing it, that human psychology couldn't withstand such adulation without being warped by it. Fact 86. The worldwide response to Kira showed how desperate people were for simple solutions to complex problems. Crime was reduced not through addressing poverty, education, or social conditions, but through fear of divine judgment. This shortcut appealed to those who wanted justice without doing the difficult work of creating a just society. Kira's support came from people who prioritized order over freedom, security over rights, and immediate results over systemic change. The series suggested that fascism's appeal lay in its simplicity, offering easy answers to hard questions at the cost of everything that made life worth living. Fact 87. Nier's calm acceptance of L's death and his role as successor showed emotional maturity, but also suggested detachment that L, for all his quirks, hadn't possessed. L had been invested in catching Kira emotionally as well as intellectually, while Nier approached it as a problem to solve. This difference made Nier effective but less engaging, as his clinical approach lacked the passion that had made L compelling. The contrast showed that brilliance alone wasn't enough for connection, that L's humanity expressed through his friendship with Light, and his obvious investment in justice was essential to his character in ways that pure intelligence couldn't replicate. Fact 88. Mello's scars, both physical and psychological, made him the most visibly damaged character among the main cast. His burns from a near-death experience left him permanently disfigured, reflecting internal damage from competition with Nier and desperation to prove himself L's worthy successor. Mello's willingness to harm himself and others in pursuit of his goals showed how destructive the need for validation could become. His character arc suggested that genius without emotional grounding led to self-destruction, that being smart wasn't enough without also being whole. Fact 89. The series never explicitly stated whether Kira was right or wrong, instead showing consequences and letting readers judge. This moral neutrality frustrated some who wanted clear guidance but engaged others who appreciated being trusted to form their own conclusions. The ambiguity reflected real-world moral complexity, acknowledging that most ethical questions lacked simple answers. By refusing to moralize explicitly, the series forced active engagement from audiences who had to examine their own values to determine where they stood. This approach showed respect for audience intelligence. Fact 90. Light's final words asking Ryuk to help him, after spending the series treating Ryuk as a tool, showed how completely he had deluded himself about their relationship. Light genuinely seemed to believe Ryuk would save him, that their partnership meant something. Ryuk's response that he had always known this would end with Light's name in the Death Note revealed that Light had never understood the Shinigami at all. The moment crystallized Light's fundamental isolation, showing that he had formed no genuine connections throughout the entire series, that everyone he'd known had been either tool or enemy. Fact 91. The Death Note pilot chapter, published before the series proper, featured different art style and plot elements that were refined for the actual serialization. The pilot showed the creators developing the concept, testing what worked and what didn't. Comparing pilot to series showed how much the creators learned during development, how they improved character designs, and refined the rules to create more engaging conflict. The pilot's existence demonstrated that even successful series required iteration and improvement, that first attempts were rarely perfect. Fact 92. Light's perfect memory and ability to maintain complex deceptions required audiences to accept superhuman mental capabilities. He remembered every detail of plans spanning years, never slipped when lying, and maintained multiple identities without confusion. This strained credulity, but was necessary for the plot's complexity. The series essentially asked audiences to accept that Light's brain worked differently than normal humans, operating more like a computer than a person. This acceptance was required for investment in the story, making it a tacit agreement between creator and audience. Fact 93. The series' portrayal of institutional power showed police, governments, and international organizations as both necessary and insufficient for addressing extraordinary threats. The Kira case required international cooperation and significant resources, but institutions moved slowly, were bound by rules, and couldn't match one brilliant individual's flexibility. This created ambivalence about institutional versus individual power, suggesting that while institutions were necessary for civilization, they struggled against exceptional threats. The tension between individual brilliance and institutional authority was never fully resolved. Fact 94. Death Note's commercial success led to extensive merchandising, from replica notebooks to character figures to cosplay accessories. The replica notebooks were particularly popular but also controversial, as they seemed to celebrate the series' murder weapon, The merchandising showed how capitalism could commodify anything, turning instruments of fictional death into products. The irony of buying Death Note merchandise wasn't lost on fans, who appreciated the transgressive appeal, while also recognizing the absurdity of making a murder notebook into a commercial product. Fact 95. The philosophical concept of the greater good was central to Light's justification for killing. He argued that killing thousands of criminals saved millions of potential victims, that some deaths prevented greater suffering. This utilitarian calculus ignored that he was playing God, deciding who deserved to live based on his personal judgment. The series showed utilitarianism's dangers when taken to extremes, when abstract calculations about greatest happiness replaced concrete respect for individual rights. Light's version of the greater good was really just his will imposed on everyone else. Fact 96. L's willingness to risk others' lives in pursuit of justice showed that his methods, while more palatable than Light's, were still morally questionable. He used people as bait, exposed them to danger, and showed little apparent concern for those harmed in service of his investigation. L represented how those fighting monsters could become monstrous, how noble ends could justify terrible means. His character suggested that opposing evil didn't automatically make you good, that justice required more than stopping killers, that methods mattered as much as outcomes. L was ultimately better than Light, but not necessarily good. Fact 97. The relationship between the manga and anime created interesting dynamics, as the anime had to adapt ongoing manga and eventually caught up. The anime ended before the manga, creating different pacing and emphasis. Later releases included material the anime had skipped, filling gaps in the story. The multiple versions of Death Note meant fans could experience different interpretations of the same story, each highlighting different aspects. This cross-media existence enriched the franchise, allowing stories to be told in ways suited to each medium's strengths. Fact 98. Light's intelligence was shown through planning and psychological manipulation rather than conventional displays like test scores or academic achievement. While the series mentioned his grades and university acceptance, his real intelligence manifested in social situations, in reading people and predicting behavior. This emotional intelligence combined with intellectual brilliance made him extraordinary, as most portrayals of genius focused on one type of intelligence. Light's multifaceted brilliance made him more believable as a threat, someone who could think strategically while also manipulating people effectively. Fact 99. The series' international setting, with L being likely English, near and mellow from England, and cases affecting multiple countries, gave Death Note global scope unusual for manga. Most series stayed within Japan, but Death Note acknowledged a worldwide context, showing how international cooperation would respond to a global threat. This broadened the stakes and allowed for cultural contrasts, showing different approaches to justice and authority. The international scope also made the series more accessible to global audiences, as it wasn't solely Japanese in perspective or setting. Fact 100. Ryuk's statement that humans who used the Death Note couldn't go to heaven or hell was followed immediately by his observation that heaven and hell probably didn't exist anyway. This undermined the rule's apparent significance while also leaving ambiguity. The series never definitively stated what happened after death, maintaining uncertainty that heightened the weight of death throughout. The ambiguous afterlife also prevented simple moral frameworks, as readers couldn't rely on cosmic justice to punish Light or reward his victims. Death in the series was final and mysterious, perhaps exactly as empty and meaningless as Ryuk suggested. Fact 101. The series explored how technology and tradition intersected, with ancient Shinigami using modern surveillance techniques, and how old forms of power adapted to contemporary contexts. Death itself, perhaps humanity's oldest concern, was given modern expression through notebooks and rules. This blending showed how fundamental human issues persisted across time, merely finding new forms. The Death Note was magic, but followed rules like technology, creating a hybrid system that felt simultaneously ancient and modern. This duality made the series accessible while maintaining its mythological weight. Fact 102. Light's desire to become God wasn't just megalomania, but reflected genuine belief that he could create a better world. His conviction made him dangerous because it was sincere, because he truly believed the ends justified means. Insincere villains were easier to oppose than true believers, and Light was utterly sincere in his twisted vision. His genuine dedication to his ideal made him tragic, as readers could see the idealistic young man he might have been, the potential that was wasted on a fundamentally flawed philosophy. His sincerity made his evil more profound. Fact 103. The series ending, with Light dying alone and desperate, rejected typical heroic conclusions, while also denying him villain's dramatic death. He simply failed, was exposed, and died pathetically. This anticlimactic ending suited a series that had consistently subverted expectations. Light received no redemption, no final moment of clarity, no dramatic last stand. He just ended, his grand vision collapsing to nothing, his name written in the very notebook he'd used to kill thousands. The ending was brutal in its simplicity, refusing to grant Light any dignity in death. Fact 104. The legacy of Death Note in anime and manga culture is undeniable, with the series remaining influential decades after its conclusion. It proved that psychological thrillers could succeed in shonen magazines, that audiences would engage with morally complex protagonists, and that stories could be built on dialogue and thought rather than action. New series still reference Death Note's approach, and it remains a gateway series introducing people to anime and manga. Its cultural impact transcended its medium, becoming part of broader conversations about justice, power, and morality. Fact 105. The series' treatment of death as both cosmic and personal created interesting tensions, with death being simultaneously supernatural punishment and simple cessation. Characters died dramatically or quietly, meaningfully or arbitrarily, with Shinigami involved or merely present. This variety showed death's multifaceted nature, how it could be both significant and meaningless, both consequence and coincidence. The series never settled on one interpretation of death, maintaining ambiguity that kept the audience uncertain and engaged. Fact 106. Light's relationship with truth was complex, as he lied constantly, yet seemed to believe his own justifications. He wasn't consciously hypocritical, but rather had convinced himself that his lies served higher truth, that deception in service of his vision was actually honesty. This self-deception made him more psychologically complex than simple liar, showing how people could genuinely believe contradictory things by compartmentalizing and rationalizing. Light's fluid relationship with truth showed how ideology could warp perception, how conviction could override reality. Fact 107. The series' popularity led to academic papers analyzing its philosophical content, legal implications, and cultural impact. Scholars examined Death Note through various lenses: ethical philosophy, legal theory, psychology, cultural studies, finding rich material for analysis. This academic attention validated the series' intellectual content, while also making it subject to critical scrutiny. The scholarly engagement showed how entertainment could be intellectually substantial, deserving serious analysis while remaining accessible entertainment. Fact 108. Misa's devotion to light raised questions about love, obsession, and agency. Was her love genuine or merely obsession? Did light's manipulation remove her agency, or did she choose subordination freely? The series never clearly answered, presenting Misa as simultaneously victim and willing participant. Her character showed how exploitation could be disguised as love, how people could willingly accept abuse, and how power imbalances destroyed relationships. Misa loved light, but light never loved her, and that fundamental inequality defined their entire relationship. Fact 109. The interrogation sequences throughout the series showcased psychological warfare at its finest, with questions and answers layers deep in deception. Characters lied not just in words but in body language, carefully controlling reactions while reading opponents' responses. These sequences showed intelligence without action, making conversation as tense as combat. The interrogations also revealed character through behavior under pressure, showing who maintained composure and who cracked. These moments were cerebral action scenes, battles fought with words and will. Fact 110. Light's inability to form genuine relationships stemmed from viewing everyone as tools or obstacles. He had allies but no friends, followers but no equals, admirers but no one who truly knew him. This isolation was self-imposed, result of his conviction that he was superior and his unwillingness to show vulnerability. The loneliness of Light's existence was never explicitly addressed but permeated his story, showing how his path to godhood was really a descent into complete solitude. By becoming more than human, he became less than human, losing the connections that make life meaningful. Fact 111. The series' examination of justice systems showed their strengths and limitations, how they could be both necessary and insufficient. Traditional justice moved slowly, required evidence, and protected the accused, but this meant some guilty went free. Kira's justice was swift and certain but arbitrary and terrifying. The series suggested that perfect justice was impossible, that all systems involved trade-offs between security and freedom, between protection and rights. This realistic assessment rejected simple answers while acknowledging the genuine difficulties of creating just societies. Fact 112. Ryuk's perspective as immortal observer gave the series a cosmic viewpoint, reminding readers that human concerns were temporary and small from death's perspective. Ryuk had watched countless humans live and die, finding them all equally entertaining, regardless of morality. This nihilistic perspective could have been despairing, but instead, it created freedom if nothing mattered cosmically. Then human-scale meaning became more important, not less. Ryuk's indifference paradoxically emphasized the value of human choice and connection. Fact 113. The series' pacing allowed for extended sequences of characters, thinking, internal monologues, sometimes spanning multiple pages. This trusted audiences to follow complex reasoning, to enjoy the process of deduction as much as its results. The willingness to slow down for thought distinguished Death Note from action-focused series, showing that contemplation could be as engaging as combat. The thoughtful pacing also allowed tension to build naturally, making payoffs feel earned rather than rushed. Fact 114. Light's final expression, dying while imagining his younger, innocent self, suggested possible regret or perhaps just recognition of what he'd lost. The series left this ambiguous, not clearly stating whether Light died repentant or defiant. This ambiguity suited his complex character, refusing to simplify him in death. Whether Light regretted his choices or only regretted failing was left for readers to decide, another instance of the series trusting audiences to form their own interpretations. Fact 115. The thematic contrast between light and darkness pervaded the series, from character names to visual design. Light brought judgment but also corruption, while darkness represented mystery and death but also truth. The series refused simple associations of light with good and dark with evil, instead showing how both contained complexity. This thematic ambiguity reinforced the moral ambiguity, reminding readers that illumination could blind and shadows could hide both threats and refuge. The interplay of light and dark created visual and thematic richness. Fact 116. Nier's final confrontation with Light was less about proving Light was Kira Nier already knew, and more about forcing Light to admit it publicly. The warehouse scene was theater, performance designed to strip away Light's carefully constructed facade. Nier orchestrated the revelation not for himself but for the investigation team, particularly for Matsuda and Aizawa, who had defended Light. The public exposure was Light's true defeat, the destruction of his godlike image before those who had believed in him. Fact 117. The series' examination of worship and faith showed how easily people could deify someone who seemed powerful. Kira's followers created shrines, wrote songs of praise, and organized their lives around his judgments, despite never meeting him or verifying his divinity. This blind faith demonstrated humanity's desire for simple answers and powerful protectors, willingness to surrender autonomy to someone claiming absolute authority. The Kira worship presaged discussions about cult behavior and authoritarian personality, showing how quickly populations could embrace tyranny dressed as salvation. Fact 118. Light's academic achievement and social success before finding the Death Note showed that he didn't turn to murder from desperation or failure, but from boredom and ego. He had everything society said should make him happy but found conventional success hollow. The Death Note offered transcendence, escape from ordinary excellence into extraordinary significance. This made his villainy more disturbing, showing that evil could emerge from privilege as easily as from deprivation, that sometimes those with most advantages became most dangerous. Fact 119. The series concluded with ambiguity about whether the world was better or worse after Kira. Crime had decreased, but freedom had eroded, safety had increased, but fear had spread. The series refused to judge definitively whether Kira's reign had been net positive or negative, instead showing both costs and benefits. This moral complexity made the ending thought-provoking rather than simply satisfying, forcing readers to weigh values and priorities rather than accepting clear answers. Fact 120. Misa's recovery of memories alongside Light created brief hope that their partnership might become more equal, that Misa might become strategic partner rather than devoted follower. But the return of memories simply restored their previous dynamic, showing that Misa's devotion was intrinsic rather than imposed by circumstance. She chose subordination consciously, finding meaning in service to Light. This showed how some inequalities persisted because both parties accepted them, raising questions about agency and choice in relationships. Fact 121. The Shinigami's rules about not killing to extend human lives showed that even death gods had ethics of sorts, boundaries they wouldn't cross. This suggested that morality existed independent of mortality or divinity, that even immortal beings recognize some acts as forbidden. Rem's violation of this rule proved that love could transcend even fundamental laws, that devotion could drive self-sacrifice even in those supposedly beyond caring. The rule added depth to Shinigami characterization while creating plot complications. Fact 122. L's sweet-eating habit contrasted with Light's disciplined perfectionism, showing different approaches to excellence. L indulged freely while Light maintained rigid control, yet both achieved extraordinary results. This suggested multiple paths to greatness, that discipline and indulgence could both support achievement. The contrast also humanized both characters, showing that beneath their genius were people with different pleasures and priorities, different ways of being human, while transcending normal human limitations. Fact 123. The series' popularity in the West surprised some Japanese creators who thought the cultural specificity might limit international appeal. Instead, Death Note's themes of justice, power, and morality transcended cultural boundaries, resonating globally. The series showed that stories addressing universal human concerns could succeed worldwide regardless of cultural origin. This international success helped broaden manga and anime's global reach, introducing many Western audiences to Japanese storytelling. Fact 124. Light's ability to manipulate everyone except L and eventually Nier showed that intelligence recognized intelligence, that only peers could truly challenge genius. Light dominated normal people through superior planning but met his match in other prodigies. This created interesting dynamics where intellectual equality became precondition for genuine conflict. The series suggested that loneliness of genius stemmed from difficulty finding equals, that brilliance isolated as much as it elevated. Fact 125. The Death Note's rule about controlling actions before death created intricate possibilities for plot development. Light could make victims perform specific actions before dying, limited only by what was physically possible in the time remaining. This allowed for complex schemes where deaths appeared natural or coincidental while actually being orchestrated. The action control rule showed how supernatural power could create strategic depth, turning murder into chess moves rather than simple killing. Fact 126. Watari's death was necessary for L's defeat, but often overlooked in discussions of L's death. Watari had been L's connection to the world, handling practical matters and providing support. Without Watari, L's successors operated differently, lacking that foundational relationship. Watari's quiet competence had enabled L's eccentricity, showing how genius required infrastructure and support. His death represented loss of institutional knowledge and relationship capital that couldn't be quickly replaced. Fact 127. The series' treatment of law enforcement showed both respect and skepticism, portraying police as dedicated but outmatched. Regular officers couldn't compete with Light's genius or supernatural powers, but they persisted through courage and duty. This balanced portrayal acknowledged law enforcement's importance while recognizing its limitations against extraordinary threats. The series suggested that traditional institutions needed supplementation by exceptional individuals but remained essential foundations for civilized society. Fact 128. Light's moments of genuine emotion, rare but present, showed residual humanity beneath his God complex. Brief flashes of doubt, moments of hesitation, and occasional regret suggested that Kira hadn't completely consumed Light, that remnants of conscience persisted. These moments made his character more complex, showing internal conflict despite external confidence. However, these doubts never prevented his actions, showing that awareness of wrongdoing didn't equal moral reformation. Fact 129. The series' global impact included inspiring discussions about capital punishment, vigilante justice, and the role of fear in maintaining order. Death Note became reference point in debates about whether death penalty deterred crime, whether individuals could justly take law into their own hands, and whether authoritarian measures could be justified by results. The series' continued relevance in these discussions showed how fiction could influence real-world discourse about justice and governance. Fact 130. Ryuk's boredom was the catalyst for everything, showing how small actions could have massive consequences. He dropped the Death Note on a whim, out of simple desire for entertainment, inadvertently changing human history. This randomness underscored death's arbitrary nature, how fate could turn on trivialities, how entire world orders could shift because one bored entity sought amusement. The series began and ended with Ryuk's entertainment, framing human drama as cosmic comedy. Fact 131. The series' refusal to glorify violence while building story around murder was delicate balance. Deaths were shown as consequences, not celebrations, with emotional impact on survivors explored. The series never made killing seem cool or desirable, despite protagonists being mass murderer. This ethical storytelling approach distinguished Death Note from works that exploited violence for entertainment, showing that serious themes required serious treatment. Fact 132. L's successors working together, despite rivalry, showed that cooperation could emerge even between competitors when stakes were high enough. Nier and Mello's combined efforts succeeded where either alone might have failed, proving that collaboration magnified individual brilliance. Their eventual cooperation suggested that intelligence included recognizing when personal ambitions should yield to larger goals, that wisdom meant knowing when to compete and when to cooperate. Fact 133. The series' treatment of mortality showed death as both ending and consequence, both final and meaningful. Characters died suddenly or slowly, peacefully or violently, but death always mattered. Even criminals Light killed were treated as individuals with families and histories, their deaths having ripples beyond simple removal. This respect for mortality's weight made the series emotionally resonant, despite dealing with mass death. Fact 134. Light's inability to see his own villainy showed how ideology could blind, how conviction could prevent self-examination. He genuinely believed himself righteous, never truly understanding that he'd become monster he claimed to oppose. This lack of self-awareness made him tragic, as he died still believing himself hero. The series suggested that most evils were committed by people who thought themselves good, that self-deception was more dangerous than conscious malice. Fact 135. The series' ending montage showing World after Light's death left Final Judgment ambiguous. Some celebrated his death while others mourned Kira's loss, showing divided opinion that persisted even after truth emerged. This division showed that conflicts over values and justice couldn't be resolved simply by removing one person, that fundamental disagreements persisted beyond individual actors. The ambiguous ending acknowledged complexity while providing narrative closure. Fact 136. Nier's emotional detachment made him an effective investigator but prevented him from understanding motivations driving Kira's followers. He could trace logical patterns but missed emotional elements that made Kira appealing. This limitation showed that pure logic couldn't fully comprehend human behavior, that understanding required empathy as well as intelligence. Nier's eventual success, despite this limitation, suggested that emotional understanding, while valuable, wasn't always necessary for solving problems. Fact 137. The series' exploration of how power corrupted showed gradual transformation rather than sudden change. Light didn't become evil instantly, but through series of small compromises, each seeming justified individually, but collectively leading to monstrousness. This realistic portrayal of corruption made it more frightening, showing how anyone could drift into evil through incremental steps, rather than conscious decision to become villain. Fact 138. Mello's chocolate addiction paralleled L's sweets, showing how brilliant minds might seek simple pleasures as counterbalance to complex thoughts. The comfort food provided grounding, something concrete and immediate amid abstract strategizing. These habits humanized characters who might otherwise seem inhuman in their intelligence, reminding readers that genius still resided in bodies with needs and desires. Fact 139. The series' influence on psychological thriller anime created new expectations for genre, with audiences now expecting intricate plotting and intelligent protagonists. Death Note raised bar for what psychological anime could be, inspiring creators to attempt more sophisticated narratives. This legacy showed how successful works could transform genre expectations, opening space for experimentation and complexity that might not have been commercially viable before. Fact 140. The final fact brings us full circle to where we began. Death Note was ultimately about how human nature responds to absolute power. The series explored whether people could be trusted with godlike authority, whether good intentions justified terrible means, and whether justice could exist without mercy. These questions had no simple answers, and the series honored that complexity by refusing to provide comfortable conclusions. Death Note asked readers to think, to question, to examine their own values and assumptions. It showed that even in fiction about supernatural notebooks and death gods, the real subject was always humanity, our capacity for both good and evil, our desire for justice and our temptation toward tyranny, our ability to rationalize anything, and our occasional moments of genuine moral clarity. The series ended, but its questions lingered, following readers long after the final page was turned. And so, dear friends, we reach the end of our journey through the world of Death Note. We have wandered together through 140 facts, exploring questions of justice and power, genius and mortality, and the choices that define who we truly are. From a notebook falling from the sky to a young man dying alone on a staircase, the story reminded us that power without wisdom leads only to destruction, and that the brightest lights can cast the darkest shadows. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine setting down the Death Note, choosing not to write a single name, recognizing that no person has the right to judge all others. The notebook lies closed on a desk, its pages blank and waiting, but you walk away from it, choosing instead the messy, complicated, beautiful work of living among equals, rather than ruling as a god. Rest now, knowing that the questions Death Note raised about justice, power, and morality are worth contemplating, but that their complexity is what makes them meaningful. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled not with judgment but with understanding, not with power but with peace. Good night.